Okay. Again, I want to acknowledge, I think, as far as traveled farthest tonight, Billy Osteen, I think, again, you're still in New Zealand, right? So Billy, the next time you're in Knoxville, come see me and we'll get you a free lunch to Petro's or something as a gift certificate or something for all your efforts. It's glad you've been with us. Tonight is our last evening to discuss March, looking particularly at volume 3. And so thank y'all for having been on this journey. And August is definitely kind of that time of the year that I know some folks are traveling and away, but it's still good to see the folks who are here, who've been a part of this book study. And Denise, one thing I'm aware of in this volume, thinking about the death recently of Bob Moses, and as they began to talk about the Mississippi experience in this book in particular, and the Freedom School work, you are the executive director of the East Tennessee Freedom Schools. So I'm just curious, connect that historical moment and that work in the 60s to the spirit of what you all are doing right now in East Tennessee.
Yeah, there's a very specific connection, right? So the woman who founded the Freedom Schools is a program under the Children's Defense Fund, which is a national advocacy policy organization. And the person who founded it is Marion Wright Edelman. And she had actually worked with King and the SCLC, and she was involved in the Poor People's Campaign in the early 70s. And that's when she started the Children's Defense Fund in 1973. She's actually the first Black female to be admitted to the bar of Mississippi. So that's her home. And she started the Freedom Schools program in 1995, building off the legacy of what you just mentioned, what happened in Mississippi. Whereas it noted that the Freedom Schools in the book talked about is focused on literacy, right? Because of the literacy tests associated with voting, et cetera. And the model of Freedom Schools today is very much a literacy and empowerment program. So what we talk about is we help our scholars fall in love with reading and fall in love with learning. And we focus on them being empowered. The overarching theme of Freedom Schools is I can make a difference. And it says I can make a difference in myself, my family, my community, my country, the world. And I do that with hope, education, and action. In addition to that, and so all our literature is aligned with those themes each week. And in addition to that, we have one day out of the summer, every site, every Freedom School site is engaged in what we refer to as a National Day of Social Action. So we pick a theme. So this year it was youth justice. In prior years, it was, gun violence or cuts to SNAP and EBT, for instance. And so one of the things we talk with our scholars about is in our country, there are two ways to affect change: your voice and your vote. All our staff are voters. They're too young, our scholars, to vote. So we help them, we give them opportunities to practice using their voice. So they will we've had marches when we were demonstrating against the administration's plans, cuts to SNAP and EBT. We had posters built and we made up chants. We marched up Gay Street and around Market Square. We shared factoids about hunger, et cetera. When it came to gun violence, we wrote to legislators and mayors about that. And this year, the focus was on youth justice. And we had a panel group for our sites to talk to, in this instance, it had to do with KCS, Knox County Schools. And we had representatives from KCS and the Disparities in Educational Outcomes Committee come in and listen to and talk to our scholars about some of the questions and challenges that they've had. So it's very much in line with what is read in the third volume of March. It's about literacy, it's about empowerment, and it's about making the country better.
Awesome. Well, let me say to everyone on the call, if you're looking for new ways to support a nonprofit in East Tennessee, East Tennessee Freedom Schools is worth your financial commitment, and reach out to find out how to participate and volunteer in the work. So again, the storytelling of these artists, they put us in the bombing of the 16th Street Church at the very beginning of this volume. And in the book, they're talking about the lesson of the call to love your enemy, and to think about what it means to target a church in the Bible Belt South, um,
On Youth Sunday.
on a youth Sunday, um, and to know you're going to hurt church people, and you're going to hurt the place they love. I mean, I think a part of one of the things with COVID and the lockdowns, many of us are so far removed from our houses of worship, and how many people that first day back in that house of worship was a moving experience of my pew, my space, the place where I sort of encounter God in a unique way. And I think it's remarkable how much of the resistance to the civil rights movement was also predicated on religion and a very distorted understanding of Christianity. And so this very basic idea of the call to love the enemy, and yet to realize with this bombing of the 16th Street Church on a youth Sunday where it killed and injured children, just what a distorted view of the gospel that is, to somehow think, let's target a church, let's hurt a church. Again, looking at the images of just the violence, the color, these girls, who, at the beginning of the panel, they're teenage girls, they're being silly in the bathroom, right? That's their job. And yet then to realize that becomes a dissonance because of where they were located in the church. And I think you said even last time, the realization that as the movement remained even more committed to nonviolence, the violence against it increased, and just what it takes to do that.
I mean, and I was struck by two things in those early pages. One, which kind of has a link to today, where you had the governor talking about what this country needs is a few first-class funerals. And then right after the bombing, you have a young white Eagle Scout kill a 13-year-old boy. And then you have a cop killing, a 16-year-old Black boy. I mean, it's like, that's kind of what we do. I mean, it set the tone.
Yeah, I think, probably many of us know the story of the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, but then to hear this, the kind of the what would you call that? The sort of copycat violence, or if this is allowed, then what else might be allowed? And so that it really does sort of sanction violence in a way that the Eagle Scout, I mean, again, what's more American than the Eagle Scout? And that somehow you can earn a badge by, killing a Black teenager. I think it says a lot about just knowing that our kids are always watching us, right? So in that regard, that kid is watching the people that he values and thinks, oh, this is okay. And that when Black boys attempting to defend themselves again become a target, and become a target in a way that is sanctioned. So it's I think, again, just looking at what John Lewis was committed to over time, and so many women figure in this volume too, their commitment to nonviolence in the face of so much violence, again, is remarkable to think about what sort of spiritual fortitude that requires.
Yeah, and what we just talked about, a lot of that is about creating fear, right? We want you to be afraid. We want you to stop what you're doing, stay in your homes or stay wherever. And it's jumping ahead a bit, but when it comes to the JFK assassination, I mean, there's a line that says, if they can kill a president, what chance do I stand? Right? And to your point, and even in light of all of that, the work continued.
The also, and it comes up in a few places in this volume. On page 18, I think it's Dr. King speaking at the funerals of the girls. In the middle of that page, they say to us that we must be concerned not merely about who murdered them, but about the system, the way of life, the philosophy which produced the murderers. So much of, at some point, kind of one feeble attempt to talk against integration or civil rights or voting rights is this defending this way of life, that somehow there is this Southern way of life that again is somehow sanctioned by religion, sanctioned by history, and that somehow that again trumps justice, fairness, equal protection under the law, and again holds so much sway, in an emotional sway, if nothing else, but holds so much sway that again in many ways has to be maddening, especially to Black Southerners who somehow their way, their attempt to have a way of life is negated because obviously the Southern way of life is understood to be a white Southern way of life, a particular white Southern way of life.
Absolutely. And one of the things that, one of my walkaways from this particular volume, I mean, this is two, is like, at this point, you're like, wow, they've been at this for 7 years or something in that range. But when you talk about the system, I mean, because you have the governors like Governor Wallace and the sheriffs and the state troopers and the judges, even had President Johnson caring more for his political viability, right, than the initiative, Secretary of Defense, J. Edgar Hoover, I mean, it's like name all the powerful people, right, who were saying, be quiet, go away, stop making all this noise. Trust us, some of them, right, are saying, trust us, we're going to help you, just trust us. A lot of power.
So realizing this volume is definitely starting to move us towards Selma and move us towards the march. When they begin the Freedom Day on page 36, 37, 38, 39, again, as recently I spoke to my mentor, a church historian, who was so moved by this scene of saying, here you have a law enforcement person saying, you can't aid these people standing in line to vote. You can't give them any water, you can't give them any help, or because you're molesting them. And it was remarkable, again, as a historian, saying, you see some of these recent voter laws that are saying, you can't give a cup of cold water to someone. And, within the Christian tradition, the whole idea that the gesture of a cup of cold water is this simple, profound, everyday, and yet transcendent gesture. But somehow that's illegal. And so the idea of, hydration as a misdemeanor or whatever it would be, is remarkable. But then you see it in this, and I think to me, hearing the talk of it recently in some of these laws, it seemed kind of laughable, or like, how could you possibly even come up with that? But then you read the John Lewis story, and say, well, this was we're going to have people stand in the hot sun for hours and not let anybody in the building. And if you aid them, somehow you're breaking the law.
Right. And even if they get in the building, right? I mean, how long did they stand? At one point, 12 people got a chance to get to the window to attempt to register, and all of them were refused.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, and I mean, to imagine just standing there, hungry, hot, tired, knowing it's futile.
Yeah.
Knowing it will serve you not.
Well, to me, I think the thing I'm aware of right now is, Dr. King talked about the arc of the universe bends towards justice, which means you really, so you think about now with all of us probably with a much more desire for instant gratification. I remember the first time I went to get glasses, Dr. Swinger said they'll be ready in 6 weeks, right? And now they're ready in 6 minutes or whatever. So like you just said, to think about, you're asking people to stand in line to register to vote, knowing it's not going to happen, but that in some ways you're making a moral witness. And I think now increasingly, I think it all the more requires us to think about what are those things in our life now that we're willing to commit to, regardless of the outcome, regardless of whether or not it will succeed, just because of the rightness of the act. And Thomas Merton, an important person in my life, who, when John Lewis is going to the first Selma March, puts a copy of his book in that backpack. Merton talks about, at some point, when you realize if you're committed to something, you're committed despite the fact that the outcome might not be what you want, but you're committed to the rightness of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of Gandhi-ish, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because sometimes, if I'm committed because I'm thinking it's going to win,
That's different.
again, I think a lot of us will, if we think our team's going to win, then we're all there. But if we realize, okay, this is the right thing to do, and we're going to get clobbered, a lot of us then just say, well, let's not even bother. And again, that I think, to me, a part of, you think about the ways we talk about this as a Christian nation, or particularly religious nation, in particular kind of city on a hill, to think about if more young people, if all of us knew about a John Lewis and a Diane Nash, and these people who had that sort of very deeply committed connection to the rightness of the act, I'm connected to some moral vision, some moral compass, regardless of its popularity. I mean, that's, again, I think we like to trumpet that as those are the kind of people we raise in this country. And yet, I think we have so few examples of them, and Lewis and Nash and others really stand out in this book in that way.
Yes, I agree. Because I see some of that, these days, but it's very different. But I mean, that's actually, part of what Freedom Schools is about, right? We're trying to enable young people to do just what you're saying. When you see something that's not right, that you have enough perspective and insight and courage to say something about it, right? To stand up and give your voice to that in some form or fashion, because it's the right thing to do.
Well, yeah, and I think it's also, I mean, what I love about the practice of the freedom vote, we're gonna practice voting, even though it's not going to count yet.
Yes.
The thing, and I hope Episcopalians get this. On Sundays when we gather for the Eucharist, we gather for a meal that we say there's enough food and there's enough wine for everybody. So you don't have to rush. You don't have to call ahead. You don't have to box somebody else out to get to the table. There's really enough for all. And then when we sort of send you back out into the world after worship, in some ways, what we've done in the liturgy is we've prepared you to act as if the world is that way, realizing we're sending you out into a world that's not that way, but start living as if there is enough. And when you see the injustice of where there's not, realize you've practiced it being a different way. You've said you want to live as if there's enough. So come back again and let us know, so here's the gap of what we say the world, how we want the world to be, and here's the reality. And there are ways in which, through the grace of God, through moral leadership, do we somehow close the gap. And I think that's what you see. And at the end of this book, into this particular volume, Lewis says he feels like for him this was the end of a certain chapter in the civil rights movement. So some goal for him had finally been reached. What had been the goal for him in the 65 Voting Rights Act, then what he wants and what is the same for a moment.
And I think that's why bracketing the story with Obama is perfect, right? Because without the vote, the right to vote, and the participation, that would never have happened.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so that is just perfect.
So I'm curious, Denise, there's so many, in all of these volumes, there's so many people we encounter who are not just the John Lewises or the Dr. Kings. Is there a particular, either in this volume or the other volumes, is there a particular person that you felt like you either learned new things about or grew to appreciate even more? Is there a particular character in the story that you want to highlight for us?
I would just say Ella Baker is one of our sheroes in Freedom Schools. And part of that, it kind of connects to the division in SNCC that evolved around gender equality. Because so often when you hear about the civil rights movement, you really only hear about the guys, right? I mean, and most of the folks doing the work, organizing, arranging things behind the scene were the women, right? So Ella Baker is one of our heroes, in that regard, because without her, SNCC wouldn't have even probably come about, or it would have been very different. But the one that like floors me every time is Fannie Lou.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
wow. I mean, just listening to being so moved by someone's talk, right? And really feeling the injustice, that currently exists for her. And then going, okay, what did you go, 26 miles or something to go to register to vote? And then came back and got kicked off her land, beaten, jailed, all of that, and it's still going. That's the one that stood out a lot for me.
Yeah, I think for me, a part of her story, because it takes her to the 64 Democratic Convention. I don't think she's on this call tonight, but Jan Lewis, who significant layperson in our diocese, married to Bo Lewis, who's a priest in our diocese. Jan was very involved in the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party as a young white woman. And but to realize that Fannie Lou was both dealing with, opposition on every side, including the people that supposedly agreed with her. And again, I think I once had a therapist talk about those sort of crazy making situations. And if you're Fannie Lou Hamer, you're in a crazy making situation, because even the people that are for you are against you. And I think it was she had a lonely position to navigate. And yeah, I wish that more of us knew her story, but yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so powerful, right? You got President Johnson jumping up saying, I got to get on TV. I need to do a press conference just so she can be ignored.
That was I think to me, that is such a great story that gets told in the book, right? Of here is this moment where she is so telling truths. And again, in a very matter of fact way, she's just telling what happened, she's just telling what happened. And what happened for Johnson is so threatening that he has to come up with a press conference for no reason whatsoever, which, that's a lot of press conferences. But yeah, and again, I love how kind of justice wins out, that even the attempt to squash it just allows it to spring up somewhere else.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned the system early on. One of the things that I really also appreciated was to have the wherewithal, one, know the law. At every point, they always had to know the law and know what their rights were according to the law, whether that was respected or not. But then the fact that there was this Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, they're like, okay, we have to affect the delegations, because the only way to get, a Governor Wallace out of here is, it's like they got to work the system. Right? It's like we can talk to individuals and do whatever, shop owners or whatever, all day long. Not sufficient. Not sufficient. I mean, even the conversations today, I mean, the voting rights legislation you're talking about is one thing. Then you have the census and the redrawing of all of that is the system, right? And how do you intervene in a way that allows for justice?
Well, and, a part of this book is moving towards the 65 Voting Rights Act. I think last week, early voting started in Knoxville for the city council. I don't know if there are other East Tennessee counties or cities that are doing elections right now. But realizing, so often we get animated with presidential elections or the governor or the U.S. Senate. And, so much of what we want to see done in communities starts at those city council meetings and just that local political interaction face to face with your neighbors and your friends and your folks in opposition, but who live next door. And those are the places where we too often just really fail to see the impact there, right? Of local people willing to serve locally is the heart of our democratic idea, right? It's not the distant politician. It's also the person up close who's hopefully solving problems and not creating them.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Um,
What did you think about the debate? It was when Moses was doing the Freedom Project and stuff. And he said, we need to have as many people here as possible. And the whole white black thing, should we really be more about cultivating black leadership or bringing in white, allies, et cetera? What was your take on that?
I think what's interesting about this book, because it is history, it's civil rights history. And the people who want to come, the people who want to help, white and black, they all on the one hand hold a vision for, we think that we're all on the same side. And I think what at some point, a part of what's happening in that story is the slippery slope of how sort of kind of white supremacy can show up, or systemic racism can show up. The other day, I had someone call me. We were having a conversation, and this was a woman I was speaking with who talked about, I've just come to learn that, like, I can say something and it can make a lot of sense and it be really smart and the right thing, but it's not until a guy says it that anyone else can hear it, right? So we obviously have that gender dynamic. It's too often in leadership. And I think for me, I think if you're a Bob Moses and you end up saying, if they want to help, I want them to help. So I think, again, it's that sense of like, we're up against so much that anyone who wants to help, I'm for. But I think already, some of the dynamic that says, kind of too many white faces in the front, just sort of kind of play into the white savior, right? Kind of play into the sort of, well, I mean, a kind of the white Christian of a certain ilk. They always read the Bible and then To Kill a Mockingbird, right? And Atticus Finch, like Jesus Christ, as far as we know, never sinned. And I think what was a few years ago, when the kind of the earlier draft of her novel came out, Go Set a Watchman. At first, I wasn't going to read it, but when I read it, I realized it was really helpful to sort of ground Atticus Finch in reality. Say a white Southern lawyer of that era was going to be a whole lot more complicated than the almost semi-divine Gregory Peck, who is there as almost like a white Jesus Southern lawyer. So I think it acknowledges just how thorny that question is. And I think too often, again, what's difficult for us as a society is we only want to do sound bites. We want to make things so cut and dried, and we often don't want to sit and listen at the complexity of that conversation. That in that story, you don't have black folks saying we hate white folk. But they're saying we're frustrated at this is our story, and join this story, but we're the ones leading, and if we're not the ones leading, in some ways we're still playing into a system that says somehow I'm less than human, and maybe you don't want to blow up my church, but you're somehow still disregarding my story,
right?
And so I obviously and I think for me it's one that too often. I think too often when I'll hear a well-meaning person who'll say, I don't see race, and why can't we all get along, and all those, again, really well-meaning, well-intended comments. I think when we do that, we end up kind of disappearing each other, right? As opposed to saying, this is really thorny and this is really complex. And so it's not just what do we achieve, but how we get there matters, right? And so the whole decision to say, John Lewis is like, I'm going to get there a nonviolent way.
Right.
And he's trying to hold together all these disparate ideas. And so I think too often for some of us, we'll shortchange the process just to get to some outcome, and fail to see that the process is one of the things that makes us who we truly want to be.
Right. I mean, because there was a lot of distrust in general, right? You don't trust the system. And then when you look at SNCC and SCLC and NAACP, I think there was some generational issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then you have the gender issues. I mean, so there was complexity on every side of this, right? I mean, so that's which which I think led to, some of the head bumping in terms of what's the best strategy to go forward. I mean, because even, when, so I learned something, right? I didn't know SNCC didn't want to do Selma to Montgomery. I didn't know that. Right? I mean, like, this is grandstanding for, MLK. And I was like, wow, really? Yeah. But again, stop trusting, too political, the turnaround, let's try to deal with the process as it currently exists.
And that debate, Denise, is going on right now. I'm in the process of trying to design working with some folks at the city to design a leadership program for Black leaders. And the question of how much white is too much white has come up 2 or 3 different times. We started to talk about how do we help, and the bishop and I are in a group that this has come up a little bit. We're trying to figure out how to connect Black nonprofits to philanthropists.
Right.
But at what point do we teach young Black leaders that they're still dependent on white folks?
Yeah.
And but that's where the money is. Exactly. And so it is very complicated, and the whole debate about we need to enlist everybody who's for the same things we're for is versus we don't need to perpetuate a psychological meme that we don't like, that we want.
That begs the question, Jerry, like, what's the conversation with the philanthropists?
Yeah.
Right? About how they think or what the choices they make.
We actually started there. We started by taking city officials, an African-American woman, to meet the philanthropist and listen to their perspective. And still, I want to help, but you got to come to me, kind of thing. And they meant it in the best possible way.
Yeah. Those are harsh realities. You're right.
I think for me, kind of where this hooks me, Denise, I was living in Lexington, Kentucky, when Trayvon Martin was murdered. And I guess it was maybe also the trial. It was some day in that story that was a hard day, and the word got out quickly that there was going to be a meeting at the Carnegie Center, an old Carnegie library that had been turned into the Center for Writing and Creative Writing, and it was near downtown, and I lived downtown, and so myself and this Presbyterian pastor, so 2 white Christian clergymen, we walked downtown to be at this meeting, and didn't necessarily intend to, but end up sitting on the front row, and there's a microphone in front of us, and there are a few conversations from community leaders, and then it's an open mic. And you put a microphone near a preacher, and it takes all we can do to keep our butt in the chair. But I remember we both, without saying it, realized our job that night was to sit down, and that we had many opportunities to be at a microphone, and that microphone belonged to the community that night, and our job was to listen. And it was only walking home, that we reflected on what it felt like to really hear people in pain and know that we were feeling a kind of pain and we were heartbroken, but it was registering in a very different place for us. And so to hear particularly Black men and Black women, parents of Black young men, the pain of what they were expressing. And so in that moment, it was good for us to be in the room. It was fun. We were glad we were in the room, but it was that our work that night was to listen.
Yeah.
And I think as Eric said, there's so many levels of kind of trying to affect a certain outcome. And I think at times, those of us who want to just, let's get to the answer, let's get there. A part of the real work of being human and being faithful in the world is the kind of that ongoing self-examination. What's motivating me? And why am I here? And why do I want to be a part of this? And so I think that those internal struggles and the internal struggles between the NAACP and SNCC and SCLC and all that, again, related to power, related to generation, related to who's done the work, who hasn't done the work, and all of that. And so, it's funny. It's a thing I feel now as a bishop that, a part of my job as a bishop is to be pushed by people. And my job is to know that they're pushing me as a part of the work, as opposed to me saying, don't push. I think a part of how we grow together is we show each other our blind spots. And yeah, so.
Yeah. I mean, as I was listening to you, I was thinking about the part of the book about Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney. And when they go to try to find them, and then they're talking to the police and powers that be, and they're just they're talking all this crap, and then we feel so powerless. Because as much as they're pushing and fighting and advocating, in the end, their power is very, very small.
Well, and I guess I'd never thought about it before. I mean, I remember, I think I was in college when the film Mississippi Burning came out, which kind of touched on that story. But the idea of their murders taking place, near Philadelphia, Mississippi, the city of brotherly love, again, kind of how that gets distorted in that story. Again, that just like I can blow up a church and kill Black girls, and it's like I'm not killing anybody, or I can fumigate a restaurant and not think I'm killing actual persons, or I can kill these young men and not be surprised that I'm absolved of their murder because somehow I've done nothing wrong. That's just there's something really broken in a person that can connect those dots. And yeah.
There was a whole system that connected those dots, right? There was not just one individual, the way the judges treated them. I mean, there was probably in book 2 where the judge literally turned his back, how they dealt with the injunctions in this time. So.
Yeah, I think it's, and again, to me, it says something about, and I know Dr. King had talked about, that a part of the civil rights movement is Black people are wanting to show this country, we really believe these documents that you created.
Yeah.
So you have these unjust judges all over the place, but we are going to continue to believe in law. We're going to continue to believe in the courts. We're going to continue to, so again, I think you think about kind of what would have been a moment for the civil rights movement to become incredibly violent if you would have said, okay, the courts are all rigged and the judges are all rigged, so we're just gonna by any means necessary, because the system is never going to work for us. Yeah. And so the faithfulness and the endurance of continuing to think, okay, at some point enough steps are going to happen that will allow the integrity of the system to show that it has integrity, and for us not to lose patience, is, again, this is a story of endurance, of superhuman endurance on these issues.
Absolutely. I mean, because I think that's part of what the debates were about, is people just losing patience. Sure. You're like being too soft, you're being too easy with this system and these people, we have to get harder. And that's, so when, Malcolm goes down to Selma, he's like, I'm just here to let you know there are alternatives.
Yeah. Well, and, there's a, in reading these books and rereading them, it's down here. Let me find it. There's this great book. If somebody wants to read more about Dr. King and Malcolm X, it's called Martin and Malcolm and America, A Dream or a Nightmare. It's by James Cone. And James Cone wrote significant work on Black liberation theology.
Crossing the lynching tree. That's
the Cross and Lynching Tree. So this is one of several good books, but to me, it puts a lot more layers especially I think for white Southerners, puts a lot more layers on Malcolm X.
Mm.
And I think at times in our country we've said you can choose one or the other, Dr. King or Malcolm X, but somehow
Yeah.
they're people in opposition to each other. And
Yankees, Red Sox almost,
do what?
It was like Yankees, Red Sox.
Yankees, Red Sox, yeah.
Can't like them both.
Right. Cardinals and Cubs. And but I think what's remarkable, and again, you think about what it means to talk about conversion or amendment of life or change of heart. I mean, a part of what Malcolm X represents at the end of this story, which is the end of his story, is I see this, it's bigger than I thought.
Yep.
It's not the white devil. There is this humanity in all of us, and how do we express that? And again, I think that's what makes Lewis such a remarkable character, is he's holding on to all these people.
Mm-hmm.
And he's refusing to kind of create categories or let people go into categories and then he's done with them. He's keeping them. He's I think keeping his heart alive by staying connected to these people. Something I learned out of this, and then I'm going to go look for now. I had never heard that Dr. King had a letter from a Selma.
I know, I saw that.
Has anybody in the studio audience tonight, has anyone ever read a letter from a Selma jail? Does anyone know that? Beverly Hurley Hill, does anybody know that one?
She'll look it up.
I don't see anybody. I don't see anybody raising their hand.
So I can say to you all, with Beverly and Brother Andrew's help, we will do our best to find the letter from a Selma jail.
Yeah.
And if we can find that in the public domain, we will put that on our website, on our March discussion. They talk about the SCLC published Dr. King's A Letter from a Selma Jail in the New York Times. While it didn't provoke the same public outcry as earlier letters, President Johnson did address the events in Selma during a national press conference. So again, a piece of his writing that I had never heard of. So it's
New Yorker, 1965.
You've already found it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't look it up earlier, but it's in the New Yorker magazine, April 10th, 1965. But that was a surprise for me as well.
Yeah, I had never heard of that. So
yeah. The other thing, when you mentioned Malcolm, he was, thank you, Beverly. I don't know if Martin got it from him or who, but he was the first one who talked about, when you talk about bringing it to a human level, he's like, forget about class, forget about race, it's about poverty. Right? And that's kind of where I recall Martin going down in appreciation when he started talking about poverty in the Vietnam War. That's when it started to go away. But I also believe that poverty links so many of us together. If we could do something about poverty, my God, I mean, we would make great strides. That is just a vicious cycle. Yeah.
Well, because I'm, so my father was born in 1930, Great Depression. His father was effectively sort of a sharecropper, died when he was 15. And, I think my father was always scarred by growing up in poverty, and was a school teacher, which wasn't the best financial decision a person could make, and was a church janitor and taught night school. But my father was still lived, was still captured by that fear of poverty, and it impacted how he navigated the world. And he died at 59, and I've only come to realize, I have great admiration for him, and I'm aware that those of us who've not experienced it, or not experienced it in profound ways, that what it means to live that close to the edge, that both what it can motivate in positive ways and also just kind of degrade as far as what many of us take for granted. And
And for me, a key connection there is is dignity,
Mhm.
because so many people who are lacking or without or poor, I mean, they're not treated very well by society. We don't treat them like they have or deserve dignity, which is heartbreaking, right? All of a sudden, you don't matter as much when you're poor.
Well, I think it was yesterday morning or maybe this morning, New York Times had an article about, this permanent increase in some food stamp benefits
Mhm.
and called it historic. And so I went and looked, and again, it was a paltry figure, right? But it was saying that much of an increase was still going to leverage so much for people.
Yep.
So what for you and me might be 4 or 5 fancy coffee drinks, was going to have a huge impact on nutrition and stretching $1 through the end of the month, and real impact on hunger, which we know connects to education, which we know connects to, connect all the dots in a positive way. And what that figure means for me is like, oh, that's the amount. And which means so often we are so far removed from knowing. When I was first ordained, people would say, because I worked with the homeless in downtown Asheville, it's like, oh, it must be hard to work with the homeless. And we were thinking, no, it's hard to be homeless. It's like that's hard. Like working with the homeless, like, no, that's the hard thing is be homeless in America, right? Be poor in America. Just because we're getting close to, we are getting close to time. We got to talk about the Bloody Sunday, and and to realize, thankfully, what that day leveraged, was historic with the Voting Rights Act. It was finally enough of a wake-up call that, like, this cannot stand. And I had a conversation last week with an artist friend of mine, visual artist in Asheville, North Carolina. And she mentioned in particular for her sort of 203, 202, 203, 204, 205, the way in which the artist makes a decision when John Lewis is just getting absolutely hammered, even what she called the weight lines, I think that was what it's called, how thin it became. So it almost became kind of I wouldn't want to call it a dream. It's more of a nightmare. I can imagine, all the cacophony of noise, but it's almost like it gets muffled the way this is described. So just to, I think, imagine how many moments in John Lewis's life where he was faced with probably his own mortality. And my guess is he might put this at the top of that list. But just that level of absolute, we're going to pour out all of our hatred on you. Again, thankfully it leverages something, but at what cost is just remarkable.
Yeah. It also just highlights the power of the media though, too. Right? Just like in one of the first books, with the hoses and the dogs and things. If this wasn't seen on TV, it wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have mattered. But
Joe Verba also mentions, for those who didn't notice, in Sunday's News Sentinel, more John Lewis books are becoming available. Here's a link to the article. Also, I'm going to mention about 50 of us are planning to make a journey to Selma and Montgomery in October. And in preparation for that, we're going to read a book called Jesus and the Disinherited by Howard Thurman. And in many ways, Howard Thurman was a significant spiritual mentor and teacher to Dr. King. And so this is a great book. So I would say to anyone, like, okay, you've read March, like where do you go from here as far as kind of keep going down the journey of reading? Howard Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited. If Malcolm X caught your attention, Martin and Malcolm and America, James Cone. There's also a couple of really good recent biographies on Malcolm X. One by Manning Marable, and then one by somebody else. So just know those.
Get to read all this stuff.
What?
How do you get to read all this stuff, Brian?
I don't leave the house.
Like, wow.
But anyway, so for you, Denise, thank you for being on this journey with us in this conversation, and for working with the kids that you work with and in introducing them this summer to March. For you, what is right now, as you think about what's next for you in your work and what you're committed to, what's getting you motivated to get up and go to work tomorrow?
Well, one of the things I shared with someone the other week was the work I do at Freedom Schools is helping our kids have the self-love and self-esteem and the courage and the resilience to keep going in a world that is not very welcoming to them all the time. And on the other side, though, I'm doing some diversity, equity, inclusion work with different organizations in an effort to try to make the world more welcoming to children who look like me. So I'm kind of working on both sides of the fence, if you would.
Yeah. Eric Harrelson mentioned earlier on this call, the diocese has invested funds in the East Tennessee Freedom Schools. Also SEED doing some green building in East Knoxville. So I can encourage you all to continue to think about where we put our dollars, be it outreach dollars in a parish, your dollars in giving to good causes, and as much as possible to connect your dollars, maybe to also your own volunteerism and your work in the community. And I think for all of us, be it both church folk and other folk in community work, to always ask the question of who's at the table, right? And who's here and who's not here at the table, I think is a part of this work.
If I could, and again, we talked about this, I think, last time, and it's like engage in these conversations with people that look like you. Yeah. As much as it's helpful to give money and time to various organizations with people of color or what have you, we got a lot of work to do. We got a lot of work to do with people that look like you. So those conversations are very helpful to everybody.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of our parishes, I have been encouraged of some of the conversations they are having. Sacred Ground is an Episcopal curriculum that has been significant for a lot of our parishes in looking at history of racism in our country, and just a profound, sobering, and sometimes that move for inspiration can be tough, but to realize, that we want the vision of what we say we are and what we are to be in alignment, right? And when it's not, that gap is filled on someone's back, and be it the gender or race or what have you, we want to close that gap. Absolutely. Beverly Hurley Hill, you've put up the Jesus and the Disinherited book. Joe Verba has mentioned an article in Knoxville News Sentinel. Also, there's the letter from a Selma jail. We'll also put that on our website as well. We're going to continue to add things to the March page. Also, once we get closer to the pilgrimage in October, knowing we can't take everybody, we're going to take one bus. What we will also do as we get closer to that is we will make sure folks know about our itinerary, so that, say, in December or January or February, if you want to make a pilgrimage on your own to sort of see the places where we visited, we're going to make a point to be with at Brian Stevenson's work in Montgomery and a variety of things that we will see. And I know in that pilgrimage, we will bring stuff home, and there will be, more work that will come out of that pilgrimage. So Selma and Montgomery are not the end. They'll just be the next stop on the journey. So.
Well said.
Beverly, anything other last word, or anybody else need a last word?
Just so much gratitude to Denise for joining us in this conversation, for giving another voice in addition to Brian Coles.
Yeah. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
And Denise, if you want to be, we're going to make you an honorary and Episcopalian.
All right.
If you'd like to wear that badge, just know that all the privileges that comes with, you have them. So
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much.
blessings on you all again. Billy, is it snowing in New Zealand? Unmute yourself, Billy.
Snowing.
He's in.
Yes, we got some snow last night.
Okay.
Not down where we live. We live right by the beach, so we didn't get any snow here, but up in the mountains.
Okay.
Okay. We'll throw an extra log on the fire. Good to see you. All your people.
Exactly. Thank you so much for this.
We'll love you. Okay. Y'all be
Thank
safe. Blessing the night. Again, Denise, thank you.
Brian. Bye-bye.